So I'm going to admit it, I am kind of a huge fan of Google Maps. I might even be a little bit addicted. Yeah, it's true. I can't really seem to go anywhere without putting on my Google Maps to tell me where to go. And yeah, that includes places that I have been many, many times, and I definitely know how to get there. But the reason I love Google Maps so much is because it gives me some data. It tells me how long it should take for me to get there, and it will tell me what is the best route to get there. What is the most efficient route to get to your destination? Now, because of this, I put it on all the time because maybe, potentially, possibly, there's going to be a faster route than I know to get to my destination, because then truly it becomes a little bit of a race against the clock, right? There's a number, 9 minutes, 23 minutes, whatever it is on the Google Maps, and I kind of want to beat it. I want to get there faster than my estimated time without, breaking speed laws and going too crazy. I just want to get to my destination quickly because there's probably some point in me getting there. The grocery store, work, whatever it may be. I want to get there and do my thing there. I don't want to spend all this time in the car. So I go to my Google Maps as my source for efficiency to tell me the right way to go. But anybody that's familiar with Google Maps or its counterparts will know that they are not always accurate. They do their best based on available data to tell you the right way to go, but sometimes they take you the wrong way. Sometimes they turn you down back ways and alleyways that is really actually not at all the most efficient way, even if, yeah, you're avoiding a crash on the highway. And one time I remember trying to get to my parents' house coming from an area that I didn't usually travel. So I did use my map because I wasn't exactly sure the best, most efficient way to get there. But not long before, it had rained, and it had rained ferociously, a thing that it really does a lot here in Oklahoma. When it rains, it pours. Now, on this particular occasion, a road that I was supposed to travel down had been flooded. This is a common occurrence enough where they had installed a gate that was put down to say you can't go this way, it's flooded. And so I had to go further down, go a little bit more north to find another way to turn down this road because I had to get to the other side of this big chunk of land to get to where my parents' house was. But as I traveled more north, past that road that was closed, I turned down the next available route, which was pretty quickly, I found out, a gravel and dirt road. But again, it had just rained. I was now on this muddy road in my low to the ground car, trying to get to the other side where my destination lied. This was still the fastest route according to Google Maps, the fastest route to get there. However, what I found myself instead was stuck in the mud. There was one moment where I was stuck and I got out of my car trying to figure out how can I do this. This was a more rural area, wasn't really anybody around. I was worried about calling somebody to get me. Maybe they would get stuck in the mud and stuck in these giant puddles that had formed, these new lakes basically that had formed through the road. But I got my car out all by myself, and I realized I had to turn around. I had to go the long way because that was going to be the better way. The shortest point was blocked. The next shortest point was in mud. The only hope I had was to go back on the highway where I was, go way further south, and take a different exit. To take a long way, all the way around this particular neighborhood that was closed off because of newly formed lakes in the middle of the road and all this mud and things that have piled up in the dirt road section, to go all the way around to get to my destination. That, my friends, is an excellent example of the pull of efficiency. I love my Google Maps because I love my efficiency. I want to get to my destination as quickly as possible with the least amount of effort, with the least amount of time from point A to point B without having to dilly-dally. But friends, what I want to talk about today is that mindset is not exactly in line with the gospel. What the gospel calls us to is not efficiency, but more often than not, inefficiency. The gospel is indeed inefficient. I'm Jake Doberenz, and this is Christianity Without Compromise, a podcast for Christians who love Jesus but are tired of culture war faith. Now, let's get to rebuilding a faith that actually looks like Jesus. Okay, it might be helpful to define some terms here. When I talk about the gospel, what I'm talking about is the story of God's kingdom coming into earth. This culminates in Jesus. That's why we have these 4 books of the Bible we call Gospels, because the gospel is ultimately the story of Jesus. That leads to things like our salvation, and it leads to things like getting to heaven and all that fun stuff. But it's more than that. The gospel is ultimately a story. And when we live our lives according to this story, we inherit a set of priorities, a way of viewing the world. I mention all the time the Sermon on the Mount because it's a very nice list on these are our priorities. These are the things that we are following. This is what we are up to as Christians. But of course, Jesus has a bunch more to say beyond the Sermon on the Mount. We have other voices like Paul and James and Peter in the New Testament that are also talking about how do we live as Christians in this world? What are our priorities? How do we view the culture, the world that we live in? What do we act like? What do we do like? How do we be in community together? All sorts of questions are being asked about how do we gospel? How do we live out the gospel? So that's what I mean by the gospel. Now let's talk about efficiency and inefficiency. Those fun little words there. Well, in short, efficiency is about going from point A to point B without expending any unnecessary effort or time or energy. You want to get to the other side by saving as much of your internal and external resources as possible. So if I need to go from Oklahoma back to my home state of Oregon, well, I'm going to definitely want to head right through all those western states. If I'm driving or if I'm flying, I'm headed west. I'm going through all those states some way or another to get in kind of that northwestern direction from Oklahoma to Oregon in the United States. It would be crazy for me to head east, to go over the eastern seaboard of the United States, to travel through the Atlantic Ocean, to, pop over to Europe and then get over to Asia, find my way over in Japan, hop the Pacific Ocean, and then end up in Oregon in whatever way I traveled that. That would not be efficient. That would take too much time and energy, and then it would take monetary costs as well. It would cost a lot to take that inefficient path. So efficiency is prioritizing not wasting any of that stuff. It's about maximizing the way we get to the end results. Tied with that, efficiency is often prioritizing the end results over the way we get there. So yeah, sometimes it might mean taking certain shortcuts, whether they're ethical or not, to get to that point. A lot of managers these days are replacing all their workers with artificial intelligence or something like that because it's more efficient and more economical. They save more money, and theoretically, at least, the work is better and more precise. Again, theoretically, I don't know if that's been shown to actually be the case in many of these situations. So when I say the gospel is inefficient, what I'm saying is the gospel costs something. Yeah, we have to extend more resources and energy and time than often we might want to expend. I'm the kind of guy that loves to not expend anything I don't need to expend. I want to take the shortcut. I want to maximize my time and resources to get to the result, not worry about the journey. I just want to be at the destination. But that, my friends, is not a kingdom value. The gospel is inefficient because the way of Jesus calls us down a path that takes some time and effort and resources, and it's more uncomfortable than we ever might want. The gospel of Jesus, this inefficient gospel, takes us down a path that is slow and costly and hard and not always gratifying, definitely not immediately so, and it's energy consuming. It's not easy by any stretch of the imagination, but it is the virtuous, more ultimately rewarding path, the path that Jesus calls us down. Let's look at an example. If we peek open the book of Mark, we will see in English this word that is going to pop up a lot, and it's immediately. Many scholars have pointed out that Mark is a very fast-paced gospel. Everything happens immediately. It goes from this scene to that scene to that scene. And in school, I learned that if you just take Mark and ignore the other gospels, you might think Jesus' ministry was like 3 months long. Everything is quick. Everything happens compactly. However, in this fast-paced gospel, there are moments where Jesus intentionally slows down, where Jesus values the interruption, where some things cost Jesus something. One of the great examples in Mark chapter 5. So, in the beginning of this scene, in this half of Mark 5, Jesus is on the quest to heal Jairus' daughter. She is sick. This guy has come to Jesus and said, I want your help. I need to heal my sick daughter. She's over there. We got to travel over there to get to my daughter. So Jesus and his posse, his disciples, they're on the case. They're on the move. They're going to go heal Jairus' daughter. That's the plan. But within this scene, Jesus is interrupted. There is an interruption in the form of a woman touching Jesus' cloak. This woman, we are told, has been bleeding for 12 years. We don't get a lot of detail, a lot of different interpretations of what exactly is going on. But the point is, she's an outcast and a medical mystery. And she wants Jesus' healing. She touches Jesus' cloak, and the power of Jesus comes out and heals her just through that touch. And so Jesus throws up a hand, pauses the show, and says, "Who touched me?" This woman admits to it, has a conversation with her. This woman is healed, and Jesus says very specifically, "It's your faith that healed you. You're good to go." He calls her my daughter. He recognizes her humanity in this moment. So right now, we're in the middle of a crowd, and we are on our way to a different situation. A daughter is sick. This woman, she has been dealing with this thing for 12 years. You think, maybe she could wait another 20 minutes, another 30 minutes, come back tomorrow, or something like that. But Jesus takes the time to not only heal her, but talk to her, to affirm her humanity. And then Jesus goes to finish how the scene started. Got to go heal Jairus' daughter. Unfortunately, we are immediately met with the news that Jairus' daughter is dead. She's dead. They wasted time. If Jesus had gotten here earlier, maybe she wouldn't be dead. And I can imagine there are some people here feeling like, well, too late. If Jesus didn't dilly-dally, if Jesus had been more efficient on his route, we could have accomplished a better goal here. But no, because Jesus heals Jairus' daughter, kind of says, no, she was only asleep. It's kind of a funny little scenario there. But by the end here, what we have is a greater story, where Jesus, taking the slower path, the inefficient path, by stopping to value somebody and their humanity, ultimately we get a greater miracle. It's a different result, because the result they wanted was to heal a sick girl. Jesus said, I can do you one better. I will raise from the dead a dead girl. That is way more amazing. And Jesus is always doing things like this. Jesus stops to hear people and talk to them. He calls out wee little men up in the trees and says, hey, I'm coming to your house today. Jesus has these meals with some sinners and tax collectors. Jesus talks to Pharisees and engages with their wild questions and hypothetical scenarios and things. Jesus is always taking time for people. Yeah, even in the Gospel of Mark, where everything happens immediately, where everything is fast paced, Jesus still shows a value of slowing down, taking the longer, more circuitous route. The gospel, as mentioned earlier, is a story that gives us a set of priorities. And one of our priorities is people, is humanity, to value who they are, to value who each individual person is as created in the image of God. And to do that, to show the value of humanity and dignity in other people, means we have to give them our time, we have to give them our energy, have to give them our resources. And oftentimes that requires us to take the inefficient route, to stop, to be interrupted, to slow down and ask deeper, better questions, to be aware of our surroundings so we don't miss the woman who has been bleeding for 12 years. The gospel calls us to pay attention, and paying attention, more often than not, requires a little bit of inefficiency. Too many of us, unfortunately, have fallen for a false gospel, a gospel of efficiency. We've imported the values of our culture, not even just, 21st century American culture. The values of efficiency go back to even ancient times. There has always been a temptation to go the fastest route possible, to extend the least amount of energy. But today, I want to remind you that the gospel isn't like that. The gospel does not adopt those particular values, the values of efficiency. The gospel is not scientific management to get the most bang for your buck from all your employees. The gospel is not choosing comfort. Actually, oftentimes the gospel requires us to get a little uncomfortable. That comfort zone you have there, step outside of that. The false gospel of efficiency wants us to be utilitarian, wants us to maximize certain good for certain people while leaving some people in the dust because they just don't make the cut. Somebody gets squashed when efficiency is the goal. The gospel of efficiency means we can focus only on our goals. Doesn't really matter how we get there as long as we achieve some things that we like. We can put on those horse blinders and charge through, ignoring who or what we trample over in the meantime. And this gospel, this false gospel of efficiency, makes you the hero of the story. Makes it all about you and none of those other side characters. But the true gospel of Jesus Christ is an inefficient gospel. This gospel, this story of reality says we are not the hero of the story. We are supporting characters, if anything. Other people are the main characters. We should support them. We should think of other people and not just ourselves, not just our goals. This gospel says, no, we don't squash people. We don't maximize all the results as the ultimate kind of ethic. The true gospel says we're not going to squash people. There is no room for, some people get it, some people don't. Everybody deserves our dignity and respect, and our time and our resources, and our love. Even if that interrupts the kind of goals we want to accomplish, the path we have to go through. Even when you're trying to beat that ETA on the GPS, and you really want to get there a few minutes earlier, the gospel of Jesus Christ says, hold on, that's not our ultimate value. Our ultimate value is not where we end up. It's in how we get there. As cheesy as it sounds, this gospel is inefficient, but it's not ineffective, because ultimately we will find ourselves closer to Jesus, closer to living out the kingdom of God that has come here on earth, that is being established even now, although it's not quite fully here yet. We will find that the inefficient gospel is indeed the most effective gospel. It is the gospel that will truly transform us into Christ and not just maximize versions of ourself, like the self-help gurus might want us to become. Now, to be sure, the inefficient gospel takes some getting used to. I mean, believe it or not, we're going to have to practice wisdom. It's going to require us to recognize some nuance here. And above all, we're going to have to wait for God to show up in the story instead of manufacturing things ourselves. It's going to require quite a bit of waiting. Hopefully you're ready to practice that patience, that fruit of the Spirit. This is the gospel of Jesus Christ. The gospel is inefficient. It's hard for me. I'm sure it's going to be hard for you. This is the path that Jesus wants us down. This is ultimately going to be far more rewarding. And I think we'll find on the other side of the inefficient path that we will become more loving, we will become more joyful, and we're going to become more patient. It is through the means and not just the ends that we will find, oh, this is how we cultivate the fruit of the Spirit in our lives. The ones that look most like Christ are the ones that don't have efficiency as their ultimate value. They're able to take breaks. They're able to look around them. They're able to say, God, your will be done, no matter how long it takes. Thanks for showing up for another solo episode of Christianity Without Compromise. I love doing these solo episodes that happen the last Tuesday of every month. Hopefully, if this is your first time, or your second, or your 19th, you'll come back again next week as we have an interview with a great mind that will help us wrestle with some of the issues of our day and discuss some of the ways that we can be faithful disciples of Christ in a culture that says our priorities should be 1,000,000% different than the priorities of Jesus Christ. Thank you for listening to Christianity Without Compromise. We just had a great episode, and I encourage you to put into practice the wisdom and advice that you received. Please subscribe to the podcast and newsletter at jakedoberenz.substack.com. That way, right in your inbox, every Tuesday you'll receive the new episode, and on Fridays you'll receive a newsletter written by me that tells a funny or interesting story with a spiritual point. This episode was recorded by me, Jake Doberenz, in conjunction with Theophany Media, my podcast production company. Please rate and review the show on your favorite podcast player, and don't forget to share your favorite episodes with your friends and your enemies. Thank you so much for all your support, and we look forward to bringing you another great episode next week.